The rusted iron spade scrapes against wet, unforgiving stone. It is a hollow, rhythmic sound, swallowed almost instantly by the midnight fog that chokes the lower bailey. High above, beyond the vaulted ceilings and the heavy oak floors, lords and ladies sleep in chambers perfumed with dried lavender and burning cloves. But down here, deep in the lightless belly of the fortress, there is only the thick, suffocating scent of damp earth, stagnant water, and human decay. He is Elias, a creature of the dark hours, bound to an unseen labor that the daylight world aggressively refuses to acknowledge. In a kingdom obsessed with divine right, pure lineage, and noble blood, he is the silent keeper of their basest truths. His flickering horn lantern casts trembling amber shadows against the weeping stone walls, illuminating a hidden world where human frailty is violently stripped of its velvet and spun gold. Down in the suffocating darkness of the Garderobe pit, the mighty duke and the starving beggar are rendered exactly the same. Elias hoists the heavy iron-bound oak bucket. The coarse rope bites into cracked, weathered hands that are permanently stained with the absolute burden of survival. This is not merely work, it is an exile, a life lived entirely in the margins of the world. He moves like a ghost through the subterranean corridors, breathing a foulness that clings to his rough woolen tunic, his hair, his very skin. He is indispensable to the survival of the castle, yet completely untouchable. A man who must vanish before the first pale light of dawn breaks over the eastern parapets, lest his mere presence offend the delicate eyes of those whose filth he carries away in the dark. He pauses in the gloom, resting his calloused palm against the freezing masonry to steady his aching back. Far above the sleeping keep, a solitary iron bell begins to toll for the midnight prayer. The sound drifts down through the ancient stone, pure and clean, cleaving the night in two, separating the sacred world of heaven from the forgotten realm of the dirt. Elias lowers his head and begins the long, agonizing march toward the dark river. But even as the holy men rise to pray and the highborn stir in their silken beds, no one can escape the bitter demands of the body. Somewhere in the freezing towers above, another soul must brace against the biting wind, bound by the exact same fragile flesh. A single drop of condensation freezes mid-slide against the masonry, trapped in the silver veins of frost that lace the narrow slit of the garderobe window. Here, at the highest reach of the north tower, the winter wind does not merely blow, it breathes. A sharp, predatory hiss that rakes across bare skin with the cold indifference of an iron blade. In this cramped, vaulted cell, the grandeur of the court dissolves. There are no silk tapestries here to catch the light, no courtiers to bow, no music to mask the stark, shivering reality of a body in winter. Lady Alara gathers the heavy indigo-dyed wool of her skirts, her fingers numb as she fumbles against the biting chill of the carved stone seat. It is a lonely, terrifying geometry, a hole suspended over a dizzying void, a direct passage from the sanctity of the high hall to the black, churning waters of the moat far below. In this moment, she is bound by an architecture that was never designed for comfort, only for the brutal mechanics of war and the efficient disposal of human frailty. The fortress, so formidable and proud from the outside, is revealed in this tiny chamber to be a hollow shell, cold and unforgiving as the earth itself. The distant, muffled rush of the river echoes up through the stone flue, a hollow sound like the drawing of a great breath, waiting to swallow the silent evidence of her humanity. To be noble is to live a life of performance, yet here, the mask must slip. She reaches into a small leather pouch at her waist, drawing out a handful of dried lavender and pale sphagnum moss, the only shield she possesses against the encroaching rot of the world. As she releases them, she watches the fragile purple blooms flutter and vanish into the vertical darkness, a fleeting sacrifice to the abyss. She watches until the dark swallows the last petal, feeling a strange, hollow kinship with the falling herbs. How much of her own dignity has been cast into this void, bit by bit, to maintain the illusion of her station? She stands, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands, preparing to return to the firelight and the lies of the great hall. But beyond these thick stone walls, in the sprawling shadows of the village below, the sun is beginning to touch the thatch, and the struggle for survival is taking a far more visceral, earthly shape. A solitary rooster crows, a jagged, lonely sound that pierces the heavy stillness before the sun. As the first bruised light of dawn bleeds over the slumped, thatched roofs, the village stirs to the familiar, suffocating scent of wood smoke clinging to damp soil, while the highborn lady in her tower may struggle with the isolation of her freezing stone perch. For Maud, the morning brings a different kind of burden, one shared by every soul within the mud-daubed walls of the hamlet. She steps from the dying warmth of her hearth into the biting air, her arms aching under the weight of a heavy clay chamber pot. Its rough glaze, once bright, has been worn smooth by the calloused hands of her mother and her grandmother. Before her, a humble vessel of the family's collective, quiet endurance. She walks with a measured pace toward the edge of the winter fields, where the great communal midden heap looms like a dark monument to survival. In the medieval village, there is no such thing as true waste. There is only the cycle of return. This rising mound of ash, grain husks, and human refuse is the hidden engine of their lives, a bitter gold that must be hoarded to keep the famine at bay. Here, the horrors of disease and the necessity of the harvest are locked in a desperate, eternal dance. Maud knows that the very filth the town dwellers despise is what will eventually furnish the barley from the stubborn, frozen earth to feed her children when the snows return. As she reaches the summit of the heap and tips the vessel, a thick, pungent steam rises, swirling upward to mingle with the silver, morning mist. It is a primal, a wordless ritual, an unspoken covenant between the flesh that breaks and the earth that endures. She stands for a moment in the gray light, watching the steam vanish, feeling the profound weight of a life where every action, no matter how lowly, is a prayer for another year of life. But as the village awakens and the peasants bend their backs to the soil, a few miles away, a different kind of silence is being kept. Behind the high sanctified walls of the abbey, the rhythm of the body is not governed by the fields, but by the relentless, tolling bells of the spirit. The rushing waters of a diverted mill stream murmur endlessly, a low guttural heartbeat pulsing beneath the great wooden floorboards of the abbey's rearward order. In the suffocating grip of the pre-dawn chill, the sound is both a comfort and a haunting reminder of the world's relentless flow. Here, in the dim lantern-lit expanse, Brother Thomas sits among a dozen of his silent brethren, shadows stretching long and distorted across the lime-washed walls. They are separated only by thin wooden partitions that offer no true refuge, no sanctuary from the raw, undeniable frailty of the human vessel. Under the strict monastic rule, speech is forbidden, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the distant, rushing water to fill the hollow space where dignity usually resides. This absolute, humbling necessity of the body is not treated as a mere chore, but as a profound meditation on mortality. In the silence, the spirit is forced to reckon with the clay it inhabits. Thomas traces the worn, splintered grain of the oak bench with a trembling finger, his knuckles white from the cold. The air he draws in is a thick, sensory tapestry, the sweet, lingering ghost of altar beeswax, the heavy musk of damp wool habits, and the sharp, unmaskable scent of human decay. There is a terrifying honesty in this room, a shared, silent confession that even those who have consecrated their lives to the eternal are still anchored to the ephemeral. The tension in the room is palpable, a collective holding of breath as they wait for the spirit to transcend the weight of the flesh. As if in answer to the darkness, the distant, ethereal strains of a choir begin the somber chant of matins. The holy notes drift through the stone corridors, thin and silver against the iron-black night. Thomas lowers his eyes, his chin sinking into the rough collar of his robe, accepting the humble truth that even vessels of divine praise are irrevocably bound to the dirt. He realizes that the ladder to heaven is planted firmly in the mire of existence. But while the monks find a holy symmetry in their shared squalor, the city growing beyond the cathedral walls is a different beast entirely, a place where the density of souls turns the quiet struggle for cleanliness into a desperate, crowded war for breath. Gardez low! The cry is a sharp, desperate blade cutting through the heavy mist of the alleyway. A heartbeat later, the silence is shattered by the sound of a heavy splash hitting the cobblestones, a dark explosion of liquid that sprays against the rotting timber frames of the lower shops. In the city, there are no diverted streams or meticulously carved stone flues. There is only the law of gravity and the terrifying proximity of your neighbor. The medieval city breathes like a suffocating beast, its narrow, winding veins choked with the collective refuse of 10,000 souls, all pressing against one another in the damp, claustrophobic gloom. Here, the struggle for a clean life is not a meditation. It is a war fought in the gutters. High above the street, in a room that leans precariously over the mud, a young servant girl hastily withdraws a dripping wooden pail from the window ledge. Her face is a mask of pale anxiety, her eyes darting to the shadows below, haunted by the constant, grinding pressure of urban survival. She is a phantom of the eaves, tasked with disposing of what the household cannot keep. Below her, the central kennel, the shallow gutter running down the spine of the street, is a sluggish, black river of sludge. It carries away the remnants of grand, spiced banquets and the thin, sour leavings of a beggar's crust alike, churning them into a singular, democratic filth. In this mire, the social order is dissolved. The waste of the bishop mingles with the waste of the thief, both heading toward the same stagnant Thames. The girl pulls the wooden shutters tight, the iron latch clicking with a finality that feels like a prayer. She seeks to lock out the street, to bar the door against the chaos of the city's exhaled rot, but the victory is an illusion. The heavy, sweet scent of inescapable decay lingers in the fibers of her woolen shawl and the very cracks of the floorboards. It is a presence that cannot be exiled, a reminder that in this crowded maze of wood and stone, one's own body is often the most dangerous neighbor of all. As she sinks into the shadows of her meager chamber, she wonders if even a king, sheltered in his golden halls, can truly escape the reach of his own mortal scent, or if he, too, is merely a prisoner of the flesh, waited upon by those who hold his most intimate secrets. The flickering light of heavy wax tapers dances across tapestries of spun gold, casting long, distorted shadows that crawl over the velvet-draped curves of the royal close stool. Outside these doors, The world is a chaotic sprawl of mud and gutters, but here, in the suffocating intimacy of the sovereign's bedchamber, the air is thick with the forced stillness of a cathedral. Lord Henry stands in the amber gloom, his fingers gripping a polished silver basin and a fine linen towel with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He waits in a silence so profound it feels as though the very walls are holding their breath. In the complex tapestry of the medieval court, to attend to the king's most base, earthly functions is not a mark of humiliation. It is the highest of honors, a sacred proximity that many would kill to possess. Now, this is the strange, shadowed heart of power, a place where the divine right of kings meets the undeniable limitations of the flesh. To be the groom of the stool is to be the keeper of the most dangerous secrets, a man who knows that beneath the ermine robes and the heavy iron crown, there is only a vulnerable, aging body. The room is heavy with the cloying scent of burning frankincense and dried rose petals, a desperate, fragrant veil intended to mask the reality of royal mortality. But the smell of the earth cannot be entirely banished by incense. As the king stirs, the soft rustle of silk against stone underscores a tension that defines the lives of everyone in this palace. The desperate need to believe that the ruler is something more than a man, even when the evidence of his humanity is held in a silver bowl. Lord Henry steps forward as the king rises, offering the dampened linen with a deeply bowed head, his eyes fixed firmly on the rushes covering the floor. He is an invisible servant, a living shadow holding the fragile, unwashed truths of a ruler whose body is synonymous with the kingdom itself. If the king fails, the land withers. If the king is ill, the borders tremble. In this quiet ritual, the high politics of Europe are stripped away, leaving only the cold, hard reality of biological survival. But as the groom retreats into the shadows and the torches begin to gutter in their wall-mounted brackets, the relative safety of the stone palace feels fragile. For beyond the guarded gates and the perfumed chambers, the vast, indifferent wilderness waits, a place where no silver basin can soften the bite of the wind, and where a man must face the raw elements of the world entirely alone. The crunch of frost beneath leather boots is the only sound in the sprawling, skeletal expanse of the ancient forest. Here, far from the perfumed chambers of kings or the communal heaps of the village, the air possesses a crystalline purity that stings the lungs. The lone pilgrim, his cloak heavy with the dust of 100 leagues, steps away from the muddy cart track, his shadow long and thin against the silvered earth. He seeks the meager shelter of a decaying oak, a gnarled sentinel that has stood since before his grandfathers were born. In this biting dawn, there are no stone walls to hide behind, no carved seats of power, and no servants to carry away the evidence of his existence. There is only the vast, indifferent wilderness, watching with 1,000 frozen eyes. He crouches among the dead, copper-colored ferns, and his breath blooming in white plumes that vanish into the canopy. To be a traveler in this age is to be a creature of constant, acute vulnerability. To step off the path is to relinquish the thin protection of civilization. He reaches down, his fingers numbing as he plucks a handful of broad, frozen leaves to wipe his skin, the jagged ice crystals scratching like tiny glass shards. In this raw, elemental moment, the titles of the world fall away. He is not a master, a father, or a faithful servant. He is merely a pulse of heat in a landscape of ice, a body far from the hearth, struggling with the same rhythmic demands that govern the wolf and the deer. A solitary black raven watches from a frost-covered branch above, its head cocked in a gesture of dark, predatory curiosity. Yet it remains a silent witness to a man stripped of all worldly pretense, a soul laid bare in the quietest of human acts. There is a profound, terrifying peace in this isolation, a realization that the earth is not a stage for human drama, but a patient consumer of all that lives. He stands and fastens his rough woolen tunic, feeling the immense weight of the silence settle back over the woods. As he returns to the track, the sun finally breaks the horizon, its pale light illuminating the road ahead, a road that leads not just to a destination, but toward the final, inevitable closing of the circle, where every breath and every burden is surrendered back to the dust.